it's Girls Camp.
Welcome to Girls Camp.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. And you want to know something funny is I hated Girls Camp so much growing up.
You did?
Yes, and I had it on my calendar, like Girls Camp podcast, but it would only show up as Girls Camp. So I had like family reunion in Utah and then Girls Camp, and I was like triggered.
Every time I'd look I'm not going to go back to Girls Camp. Why did you hate it? You had to wear capris and...
Probably, yeah. I don't even know, honestly. I think that I was just talking to my parents about this, like my whole upbringing, I just feel like there were so many things about church that like I just didn't vibe with. I don't know how else to explain it. There isn't something super specific that I can point to.
Girls Camp is like church on steroids. Like it's
Yes.
like you can't escape it. You're there the whole time.
Yes.
So I can see that.
Maybe also I just like don't like camping as well. That could also be part of the picture. But anything having to do with church, it was always just a little bit like dragging my feet. I feel like growing up. That's what I was talking to my parents about this weekend. Like seminary graduation, a fireside. I was just like, I don't even know why.
You were never so stoked on it.
Yeah, never super connected or like excited about it. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, hopefully this will be a better Girls Camp experience.
It will. It already has been. I got my soda and I'm ready to roll.
Tell us. You went and
I got the Dr. Creamberry, Dr. Pepper raspberry with cream, and
you like it.
It's been injected into my veins and I'm getting the energy going.
You're ready to roll. Yes. We went and got sodas before, which I should do every time. Like
that needs to be
need
tradition.
a soda. Yeah. While you're podcasting. You are for sure number one most requested guest on Girls Camp.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so honored.
I am so excited to get into your story because I feel like I'm excited to know. You talk about it. Like you've kind of talked about here and there, but I'm excited to just hear the story of Mormonism, of what it's all been like for you. And I know the listeners are really excited too.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so glad you're here. Let's start at the beginning. You were kind of talking about this. What was your upbringing like in relation to Mormonism? Where were you living? Kind of what were you feeling like with the Mormon stuff?
Yes. I grew up in Gilbert, Arizona, which is very heavily Mormon populated. And all my family on both sides are Mormon. All my friends were Mormon. It was like in my DNA, honestly. And even though I was just talking about how I had this sort of disconnection or this like annoyance for some Mormon activities or things I would have to go to, at the same time, it just was life. And it wasn't like at a young age I was like, I don't want to do, it was just more like, oh, this is annoying, but this is just part of my life. And I go to church and this is, and it wasn't all bad. I mean, I had some fun people at church that I loved, and I had some fun leaders growing up. Good experiences too, obviously mixed in there. And yeah, I don't know. My mom actually just told me this weekend that when I was 12 years old, we were sitting in the car and I said, I just don't understand. There's no way that this is the only true church.
Really? At 12?
At 12. And I was like, really? We were talking about this and she said, yeah, you were just saying it doesn't make sense and it just doesn't feel possible that we know the truth out of like everyone in the world and that this is the only true church in the world.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I think growing up, I think that's like a big part of a lot of people in their 20s that I know or their late 20s. You are just understanding and kind of going back to your childhood and seeing why you are the way you are. And I think all those things that I'm talking about, not being connected to it, saying those types of comments to my mom, I'm like, I just have always been this way. And it makes a lot of sense why I've had so much dissonance with it and I've had so much disconnection because I've been feeling like this way since a child.
Yeah, since a child. That's super interesting. Go little Jaci. I feel like that's a big deal at that age, especially when you are very insulated by Mormonism. Because, yeah, I grew up in Provo and I didn't even consider that people weren't Mormon because I wasn't ever around it. But I feel like you were obviously like had a worldview that was like, wait, like thinking about other people beyond just like your community, your family, which is really cool. Do you feel like growing up, so you're saying like, yeah, you weren't like jiving with it. Were there any significant experiences that were like really off-putting toward the church, or any like things that felt damaging or hurtful? Or was it more just like, not necessarily my thing, but whatever?
There's not one specific experience that I can point to, but I think just the overarching themes in Mormonism, one of those being kind of the role of a woman and the role of a mother and a wife and all that stuff, it just hasn't always connected with me. And I think that for a long time, I don't know if you saw my TikTok about reading my old seminary journals,
Yes.
but that kind of is also an example of like, I just feel like I felt out of place and like I just wasn't good enough growing up because I didn't have the same desires, quote unquote, or things as other people. And so when I'm in church and I'm hearing, you know, your role as a woman is to be a wife and to be a mother and to do this and that, those are beautiful roles. But I think I've always just been very independent, and I, from a very young age, have like started all these little businesses and made my own money and been very independent that way. And the idea of being just a mom and a wife and like that's your thing didn't excite me.
Totally.
And I think that, I don't know, as I've gotten older, I've realized a lot of people, when I share stuff like that, they're like, thank you, because I felt the same way. I didn't know how to say it. So I realized that I'm not the only one who feels that way, which is nice to know that there's probably a lot of people out there. But I think it's just hammered into you so much. It's like your desire should be to have kids and be a good wife and like cook for your husband, you know, and those things sound like, yes, there are other roles for women, or they say certain things in the church, but those are really the main takeaways.
Absolutely.
That are hammered into your head.
Yeah.
And when you feel like, well, I don't want to do that, that's not, I was like almost wanting to rebel and be like, I'm not gonna get married young. Got married when I was 21. I'm like, ugh, dang. I fell into the stereotype. I really wanted to be, you know, have my
different
career, be quirky and different, but
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there's a box. There's like a real, no matter how you slice it, there might be like different ward cultures that do it better, whatever. There really is a pretty specific box for women. And if that's like not your jam, you're going to young women's activities where it's like, let's learn how to cook, or like, it's beyond just like the messaging. That's like what you're doing in the church, or like seminary, like you were saying. It's like, what kind of husband do you want to have, and all that stuff. And if you're like, wait, that's like not the main thing I want to be thinking about as like a 15-year-old girl, like I have other aspirations beyond getting married. Yeah, it starts to feel like, this is like maybe not jiving with me. And it seems like, I mean, you're super career oriented. You have an incredibly successful career. And if that was already like part of you as a young child, that's not super, like you were saying, encouraged for women.
No. And I remember specifically, it's crazy how things stick with you. I remember when I was like 14, I heard my mom's friend say, you just cannot be a good mom if you are working or if you own a business, point blank, period. That's what she said. I remember being kind of crushed by that comment, because I was like, you know, I'm listening to this woman who's in her 30s or 40s and I'm 15, and I'm thinking, dang, she knows more than me. And if she thinks like you can't do both, that's such a bummer, because I, like, even at that age, I loved photography. I wanted to have my own business. I had all these aspirations, and I really was never boy crazy, or like, I don't know. I just wasn't obsessed with the idea of like, I want to get married, I want to have kids. It just was never me. And so I remember like having these desires, and then like going to church or hearing comments like that and just being like, ugh, I feel like I feel misunderstood. I feel like I don't belong in this environment, but I want to, is the thing. Like, so then I would try and kind of push things down and be like, yeah, I really want to get married. I don't know. It was you're at clashing.
Yeah. There's dissonance. What kind of Mormon were you growing up? Like, I'm curious about the Gilbert culture too. Like, were you and your friends all just like pretty much doing the things you were supposed to do? Like, was there any rebellion or not really?
Literally no rebellion.
Really?
I was such a just
true
on
blue,
the nose, true blue,
Mormon
everything
girl.
you would expect. Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the culture of your friend group and stuff too.
Totally. I remember we had one guy friend in high school who he like started smoking weed, and I literally was like, I have to pray for him. Like I was so worried, you know what I mean? I just had a really solid Mormon friend group who we never drank, we never partied, we never did anything. Like seriously,
it just like wasn't a thing.
It really wasn't a thing. I mean, yeah, like I'm trying to think of the extent, but basically essentially no rebellion at all, which is interesting. It's like the only rebellion I had was in my soul, in my heart.
You're like, I'm gonna be a boss babe, and that's my rebellion.
Exactly.
That's like your high school years. Tell me about after you graduated, just a synopsis of like you've moved a few places, like getting married, and what was going on like in relation to Mormonism too.
I moved to Utah pretty shortly. I went to a community college for 2 days, dropped out.
2 days under the belt.
Yeah, I was doing photography full time, and it was going really well, and I was getting opportunities to do just cool things like travel places, and I was like, I cannot be in school full time and like doing this. And my parents were super supportive. Like I came to them, I was like, literally day 2 of college, I'm like, I do not want to be here. Like, could I just stop going there? Like, yeah.
Cool.
So I dropped out. I started doing photography full time, but I was like, I do want the kind of college experience. All my friends were going to college. Pretty much like most of them were coming to Utah. So I decided to move to Utah and live in Utah, like in the not student housing, but close by.
Where did you live?
I lived at King Henry.
I lived at King Henry.
Really?
What year were you there?
I was there. It must have been 2014.
When did you graduate?
I graduated in 13.
Okay, we literally maybe lived in. I feel like we would have like been in the same ward or something. I graduated. Honestly, me neither. Well, I went on a mission soon after, but I graduated 2013 too, and then I lived in King Henry that fall.
I think I did too, actually, that fall.
Maybe we lived in the same place. They might also have multiple wards just of King Henry.
Probably.
Yeah. And the pool, the one thing I remember about King Henry is like you literally were not allowed to wear a bikini to the pool.
I was only there in the fall and winter. I don't even think I ever went swimming. Yeah. But the funny thing is I lived in Utah, and for like a few months only, because I was like, I want the college experience. But then I was traveling a lot for for photography and everything, that I was like, this is actually kind of pointless that I live here and I'm paying to live here when I literally am not even here half the time.
Yeah.
So I ended up moving back to Arizona pretty shortly after. I think I only lived in Utah for maybe not even 6 months, like 5 months or something. Yeah. And I also talk about another, like, I just didn't want to like go to church and meet. I was just like, I don't know. It was always just so like a drag to me. I was just like, really, I have to do this. So I mean, I went to the ward like often enough, but
were you feeling just like bored by it? Tell me more about that. Why do you feel like you didn't want to go?
Honestly, when you said bored, that's kind of the main feeling. Yeah. It's just like
it wasn't doing
repetitive
anything for you.
And boring.
Yeah.
Like I am also such a this is something I've realized through just this whole like deconstruction experience too, is like I really do not like almost like repetition and routine. I really like to switch things up.
Oh, interesting.
And so I've realized that like going to church every Sunday and essentially hearing like the same things over and over, and on top of that, not connecting with them, I was like getting so bored by it.
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is not how I want to spend my Sundays. Like, you know, and before it was 3 hours, which is a long time. And I just felt like, going to church and spending my Sundays here where I don't even like connect with what they're saying for hours, hearing the same things over and over, still hearing that same rhetoric of like, you need to do this and this. And I'm like, I don't even want to do that. Yeah. I don't know. But it felt so, it's like I was saying, it felt so a part of me where it's like, this is just life and there's no other option. But I feel like there's tiers of Mormonism. And like I was in the kind of just in between where it's like, I'll go and like that's fine. I don't have to be die hard and like bearing my testimony every week. Totally. I can still go. Yeah. So that's kind of where I was for a really long time.
Yeah. Just like identifying as Mormon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that because I think that's something that could very easily be downplayed. Oh, church is boring, whatever. But it's like, no, if you're feeling so understimulated and just like not fulfilled by like church, that's a big deal.
And not growing. Like,
Exactly.
not evolving, not growing.
Not learning.
Yes.
I feel like that's a huge deal. And during part of my journey, I like started having panic attacks at church. And I think part of it was because like, yeah, I didn't feel comfortable there. But a big part of it was like, I literally felt trapped because I was like, I'm bored. I have things I need to do. And I feel like I'm trapped here. And it's like making me panicky because someone's like droning on at the pulpit. And it's like kind of got like panicky almost to have to just sit through that.
I relate so much. And there was like another layer too for me in that, where once Leif and I got married and we started going to church, some people would like recognize us from the internet.
Yeah.
And then I would feel this extra pressure where I was like, if we're not like going to church every week, they're going to notice. And then they're going to tell people like they're not active. And I felt this other weird thing where I would tell Leif, I'm like, I'm fine to go to church. I want to go to church. But literally, can we go to a freaking different ward every week? Like, I don't want to be hooked to this ward and like get a calling and have all this pressure on me. And like on top of it, if people
or like tracking your movements.
Yeah, like I don't know. It just felt very weird.
Or even if you like left early after sacrament.
Yeah,
people are like on Reddit, like
exactly.
Jaci doesn't go to Sunday
and
school.
I was like, oh, I don't want rumors. Like it just was this weird element.
Yeah, that's like such an extra added layer of stress. You were doing influencing too, right?
Yeah.
Like when did that kind of blow up for you? Or was it steady growth? Were you like doing that in high school already?
Yeah, I was doing it in high school already. I mean, I wouldn't say I was an influencer in high school. I was doing photography and posting it online, and I had like shortly after I graduated, I think I had 10,000 followers, which at the time it was like,
that's a ton.
Yeah, it felt like kind of crazy, and I really wanted to continue it, but I hit 100,000 followers after Leif and I had been married a few months. Okay. So to give like an idea, but I've just had the platform for a while, but I didn't start posting about my personal life until kind of around when Leif and I were dating. I would post photos of us and stuff. So
yeah, that's such an added layer. Like I'm so curious too about how that all plays into all of this. Let's talk about getting like meeting Leif, getting engaged, the marriage part. But then I also am curious about how much of that following you feel like was connected to the Mormon community. Yeah. And how that like plays into that pressure you're talking about.
Oh my gosh, it's so weird. It's so weird looking back. So Leif and I we met in like June. We got engaged in November, and then we got married the following March. So it was like 9 months from the time we met till we were married. Which again, typical pipeline. I'm just like, oh, I'm the stereotype.
I know. You like so bad don't want to be it. And then you do it and you're like, well, but I'm still different though.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like trying to find ways. But you know what's interesting is that we got married in the temple, and like there was no other option to me. It was not like I even considered not. Yeah. But I remember having issues with like, you know, I knew I was going to have this temple recommend interview where they ask me specific questions like, do you have a testimony of this? Do you have a testimony of that? And I told Leif, I don't really. Like, what am I, should I just like lie? And he's like, just do whatever. Like, just do whatever feels right. Leif has always been the perfect match for me in this specific way where he's just very, first of all, he doesn't really overthink much. He's like, it's not that deep. Just like do what you want. But I'm such like I have to do this the right way. I don't want to, like, I physically feel like I can't lie. Like, I'm not going to lie in this temple recommend interview. Whatever. That's like a whole other thing. So I remember just like telling my bishop in those interviews, I'm like, I'm working on it really hard. Like, yeah, I do have a testimony, and I'm like working on that. It hasn't always come easy. You know, I would try and find ways, and they're like, okay, great.
Instead of just like, hell yeah.
Yeah. Instead of being like, absolutely. Basically, we got married in the temple. Yeah. And then I didn't want to this is just crazy to me because it was way back then, but it just shows how disconnected I felt from all of it. Is like, I didn't post any of the photos of us getting married like at the temple on my Instagram. I only posted like bridal photos elsewhere and like photos of our reception. And I remember intentionally doing that because I was just like, I don't want my platform to be like, I'm Mormon.
You didn't want to be connected to the temple.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't want to be connected to like, you're an LDS influencer. And so from that point forward, I pretty much started never talking about the church. Like I did up until then. I remember I would be like, hey, for any new faces around here, like I'm Jaci, I'm LDS. Like I would do that in the beginning. And then once it just started feeling like I just don't connect with this, I was like, I don't want to be known as like the Mormon influencer or something. So I started just not posting about the church at all, which is like kind of the beginning of the end.
That's telling, but I also feel like that's really cool. It sounds like you had the foresight to be like, let me keep this private. Yeah. Because it's not like you were done at that point, it sounds like, but you were like, okay, this is going to be something that I like want to keep private and don't want connected to like my brand in a huge way, which I think is like really smart and sounds like really intuitive because yeah, you know, those girlies are like scrolling the feed, checking for garments, checking
and I
for
knew
the temple.
And I knew they were. And I, for so long, I would post photos of myself like wearing just garment appropriate clothes, but not wearing them because I was just like, I don't want people to say anything.
Did you ever wear your garments really? Or did you?
I did for probably the first 6 months to a year, but I felt always so disconnected from them, and I also felt so uncomfortable in them. I would get UTIs all the time. I was just like, I absolutely hate wearing these, but I just felt like I needed to, so I would try.
You gave it a good shot.
I gave it a good shot. After like a year, I was like, I cannot do this anymore, and literally once I stopped wearing them, I did not get UTIs anymore.
Honestly, they're bad for health.
They are.
Period.
They are, especially women.
Yes.
Women's health. So anyway, I stopped wearing them, and I would use like me living in California as like a crutch. I'm like, I'm at the beach.
I'm wearing a bikini under that. Sorry. Yeah. Always.
But yeah, I stopped wearing them probably after a year.
I remember like when you would do Q&As. This probably a while ago, and people would like always ask on your Q&As, are you Mormon? And I remember like that always being a thing. And I'm trying to remember how you would even respond, but I feel like obviously people were like, is she Mormon or is she not? Like,
totally.
What did that feel like as you were maybe deconstructing or choosing to not wear your garments? Did you feel that speculation? Were people like DMing you? What was that like?
Yeah, it was definitely an added layer. I blocked all words I blocked the word Mormon, garments, LDS, Latter-day Saint, everything that I could think of that had to do with Mormons. So I would never see comments roll in about it. Because I was like, people would be like, why aren't you wearing your garments or things like that? So I just blocked all the words. And then I honestly was like, I'm living in bliss now.
Yeah,
like, people
amazing.
never ask. I was like, people don't even care anymore. I'm like, oh wait, I blocked all the words, so they can't even ask me.
That's so smart though, because what kind of person publicly leaves a comment like, "Are you wearing your garments?"
And now, if someone asks, I'd be like, no. Like, can you see? Like, it's silly.
You're like, I'm wearing a crop top.
Yeah. But it definitely was an added layer, and I think the public platform on top of anything, it just makes things hard because you just get criticism for stuff.
Totally.
And so it is hard, and I would hear things because people know more about your life than the average random person. Like, you can get away with more if no one's watching what you're doing.
Totally.
And specifically with like garments, it's such an outward thing that you can see. So even when I was like, I don't want to be public, I don't want to be like, hey guys, I don't connect with this anymore. But it's like, well, I guess you can see because I'm not wearing my garments, and like that kind of sucks because I want to live my life.
I hate that about garments. It feels like it makes people like, if you're not ready to publicly talk about that, but you're ready to publicly wear a tank top, it's like,
well, you have to be ready for both.
Exactly. And that feels very unfair, especially when you're talking to like hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And they're like expecting to know like every step of your journey. That sounds really stressful.
And people also, like in my hometown, it would be like, why don't they have kids yet? Like, because we'd been married for whatever, 4 or 5 years, and people would be like, I remember hearing this thing, I don't know, some narrative about how like I'm so selfish and like we just want to travel the world and like we don't care about it. And I'm like, correct, we want to travel the world and like be with ourselves, but then on top of it we're struggling with infertility. Totally. So I'm like, just all of it on top of it, I'm like, I don't want to post anything. It just is so stressful.
Yeah.
So
going back to, you got married in the temple, you like decided to not really be like putting that stuff on social media. You called that the beginning of the end. What were the steps happening that were like having you distance from the church besides the garment stuff?
Just feeling so much, just doing mental gymnastics constantly, like trying to justify why, you know, like any new thing that would come out that from the church that I just disagreed with, I was like, oh, well, that's another thing that's why I was saying there's like tiers of Mormonism. It's like, you are the Molly Mormon, which I was in high school. Like I just like did everything I was supposed to do, whatever. And then it just goes farther and farther to where it's like, you're the progressive Mormon, and you're like, well, I support gay rights and whatever, but you try and justify things. It's like, well, this is just my only option, so I can make this work. And tithing was actually like a huge thing for me. That was kind of a light bulb moment where I was like, just made the connection that isn't really hard to make, but took me 25 years of like, oh, I have to do A, B, and C. And one of those things is I have to pay 10% of my income to this institution if I want to go to the temple, which is the only way I can like go to heaven. So basically I have to pay 10% of my money so I can get to heaven. And that just did not sit right with me at all. That honestly was one of the things that was like a done deal for me.
Yeah.
I was like, that is really a weird thing that I just do not believe to be true. And I don't feel right about it at all.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it. The way you said it is true. It's like A to B. You don't pay 10%, you can't get into heaven. But there's all these like whirly whoops we do along the way of like, well, no, because this or that. Or, well, actually, it's because we're trying to keep the lights on at the church or whatever. But when you actually just like
Break
can
it down.
look at it as it is, you're like, wait, how was this not clear all along? A, and B, that doesn't sit well with me.
No.
It's the mental gymnastics that like prevent you from being able to make those like pretty straightforward conclusions in retrospect.
Exactly. And I knew in my heart, I was just telling my dad, like, it's hard for me sometimes because a lot of my feelings about the church or a lot of the conclusions I've come to about the church are based off feeling. They're not based off of facts or even history, which there's plenty of history too, whatever, don't get me wrong, and there's plenty of scandals and things that whatever, but if we're talking concrete evidence. But I think for me it's just always been this very strong intuition thing where it's like I'm just trying to fit into this box that is not fitting, and I've known it hasn't been fitting since apparently I was 12 years old.
Yeah, totally.
Just trying to constantly justify it and be like, it's okay, and I want to be Mormon. The thing is, I wanted to be Mormon. That's what I think is like a huge misconception and thing that really bothers me, just that narrative of like, you want this easy life, you want to like go off and sin and do whatever you want, you don't want to follow the guidelines, and it's like, that is not what my road has been like.
Totally.
I wanted to stay in the church. I wanted to be Mormon because my entire family's Mormon. All of my friends at that point were Mormon. My in-laws are everyone I know is, you know what I mean? Everyone I love.
Totally.
Like, I mean, not now. Like, I have friends and people in my life now who aren't, but that was not easy for me to walk away from. That's like, that was my comfort.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point to make too, because I do feel like it gets diminished sometimes, especially now. Like, I was talking to a friend and she's like, yeah, like I just told my mom I've left the church, and my mom was like, oh, well, that's the trendy thing to do now. And I'm like, a trend? Like, leaving the religion of your upbringing is so hard. It's so devastating. And being like, well, everyone else is doing it. I'm like, that's just not why people are leaving. And that's so diminishing of the experience. And honestly, like, even still, even though there are more people leaving, there's more people speaking publicly about it, there are still like truly devastating consequences, whether that's externally, like people getting ostracized from family members or friends, and also just internally, like, you know everything about the this life and the afterlife and the universe and God, and then all of a sudden you don't. Who's gonna just like choose that for fun?
No,
you know,
you lose so much certainty, you lose support, you lose respect from people.
Totally.
Like, it's really hard. And I think, I don't know, I've been posting more about it lately on just social media, and like I'm always kind of just trying to make light of it, or I guess that's just like my humor, you know. You see my TikToks of me being like, I'm in my hoe era, I'm gonna do what I want. And I'll get comments of people being like, you're so disrespectful, like you're making these like disrespectful jokes about religion, and like some people find that very sacred. And like, while I do respect that for you, I think where it gets lost is like, this is not a random religion that I just chose one day to be like, I'm gonna pick this one to be annoyed at and like to make fun of. It's like, I know what it's like to be Mormon. My entire family's Mormon. I have grown up in this for for over 20 years. Like, I'm very familiar. I've been to the temple. I've paid my tithing. Like, I've done bishop interviews. I've been to Girlscamp. I know what it's like to be Mormon. I'm not picking a random religion to like make fun of. And I think me making light of anything, it would never be to be disrespectful. It's just to make other people who maybe feel like me feel a little bit more light and like less alone. That's the only reason that I share those things.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. I feel like we've earned the right. Like
100%.
We can do it because like we did it, and we've earned the right to like talk about it however we want to, truly. And B, I actually had this guy on my TikTok, and he commented on like 10 different videos. And on one video where I was talking about garments, he's like, so when's your video going to come out making fun of like Muslim religious clothing? And then I was talking about the word of wisdom, and he's like, so when are you going to be making fun of like Jews eating kosher? And I was like, oh no, I'm not going to do that because like I wasn't raised Jewish and I wasn't raised in these other faiths. I was raised Mormon.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm talking about
That's
it.
why I have personal experience.
It's literally my life. Like, I feel like that's what gets so complicated about like disrespecting a religion. It's like, so what? I'm not allowed to just like literally talk about my own life experience. This was pivotal to my life in so many ways. And if I like to make jokes about stuff, I'm going to make jokes about it. That's such an important distinction to make. So my dad is like, growing up, he had alcoholism, drug addiction. And I've talked to him because doing this podcast, like I talk about it and I'm like, how do you feel? You know? And he was like, that's your life. Like, I'm not going to talk about it to protect him because that's my life too. Like, that's my story. And like, obviously people are going to fall on different places of like how you're allowed to talk about things or what tone you're allowed to use. But like, if you feel aligned with like your mission and sharing, I just feel like you should be able to share. And I always say, like, if it's not flattering to the church, that is not my fault.
1,000,000%. And that's also a narrative that just drives me insane is like, if you share something, they're like, well, this is why I shared about the Trek experience. And if you watch the video, I mean, yes, the tone of it was like kind of, oh my gosh, this was kind of a crazy experience.
Which it is.
But which it is. But I also kind of was just objectively saying what the Trek is.
Yeah.
When you watch back the video, there's not much opinion in it, honestly. It's basically like, oh my gosh, I realize that you guys, probably a lot of you don't know about the Mormon Trek experience. Let me tell you about it. So you do this, you go to And I got a bunch of comments that are like, this is why people think we're crazy. Like, you're making us look bad. And I'm like, girl,
this is what happened.
This is what happened. I'm not even like, or they'll be like, it's different now. It's different now. And it's like, I'm still entitled to speak about my experience. I know it's like a buzzword right now, but it's literally like gaslighting. It's like gaslighting you into saying, be quiet. Don't talk about the parts that look unflattering. It's like, well, that's what happened. So
exactly. And yeah, as a post-Mormon, you're not going to be like, it was so spiritual to connect with the spirit of my ancestors. And like, maybe some people felt that at Trek. That's great. They can make a TikTok about it. Perfect. Like, tell your story. That's fine. But I do feel like it's a weird trick to be like, okay, well, if me sharing an objective experience and like how I felt about it and how I think about it is like making something look bad, then maybe you should examine the thing that looks bad.
Exactly.
As opposed to attacking, that's what gaslighting is, as opposed to attacking me as a person and being like, well, you didn't talk about this with enough respect, or, you know, this is sacred to me. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, it can be, but me sharing the facts of my experience, like, is what it is. Sorry.
And you know what I made the realization of recently is that when you are a part of the church very heavily, it becomes a massive part of your identity. I think everyone can relate to that. It's like, literally, like I was saying earlier, it's a part of your DNA, it feels like. So people who are still very bought into the church and they love it so much, it's such a massive part of their identity that when you challenge it or you say something quote unquote disrespectful, it hurts them so bad. And I think that's what has made me hesitant to share anything in the first place, is because when I share on social media, I feel like something about me is that I think I can hold a lot of perspectives at one time. And so it makes it hard sometimes to share things because, you know, I'm sitting here on this podcast with you and I feel so open and I feel like I don't care. I'll say anything. But then as I'm speaking, I start to think of, okay, what if my aunt listens to this? What if my in-laws listen to this? What if my friend, And then I'm trying to be respectful of everyone. And I think that's what gets really tricky and really hard, because you can't possibly respect everyone while also being authentic.
Amen. That's like the whole wrestle of being post-Mormon is because you feel like you care about people. You care about plenty of people who are Mormon. But it's like, I cannot continue to filter and censor myself in order to make other people comfortable. But because of that identity piece you talked about, it's like, oh, damn, like if my mom listened to this, she would literally feel like I'm saying like my whole childhood was a sham.
Exactly.
And that's not what I'm saying, but I can understand how it would feel that way to someone. But then you start filtering yourself and it's like, no, like I can say what I need to say and what I feel, but it gets really tricky when you're like really doing your best to, respect people. And like you're saying also like hold other perspectives. Like I'm trying so hard. Like my whole goal of this year is like, I don't have to disclaim after everything I say.
Totally.
Like, you can make a Trek video and just like post it. And you don't have to make a follow-up video of like, yeah, I know some people like Trek
Exactly.
and like this is the parts of Trek people like. It's like, that's not our job. We
No.
don't have to do that.
And that's a given. Like, I just was talking about this on one of my TikToks. It's like, what aboutism? It's like, well, what about this? And what about if I liked it? And it's like, hey, I'm speaking about my experience. And the identity piece that I was saying earlier is like, I think now that I've removed myself so far, like I feel like I've removed that part of my identity. The Mormon part is like, it will always be there buried somewhere. It was my entire upbringing, but because I no longer connect with Mormonism as part of my identity, I'm willing and able to make more jokes and make more light of it because it's less serious to me.
Totally.
And then I realize that when it's very serious and sacred to people, they don't have that same perspective. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So
yeah, and it gets really triggering for people. I always just like remind myself too, like, I've been in the position of like being a Mormon, trying to make it work, and then seeing someone like make a Mormon joke, and it does feel really hurtful. And I think a lot of times those are the people too who are like trying to hold on and maybe feeling uncomfortable in some ways, and it feels even more hurtful because when you're in a phase of like trying to justify and trying to make it work, and then someone comes online and is like, this is really silly, that feels like
you're like, oh, I'm trying to hold on for dear life. Like,
Exactly.
why are you making me more, you're causing me more dissonance now. Like,
exactly. I'm curious, what was there like a final straw moment for you? When would you say you like stepped away, and what was that like?
probably like a year ago or a year and a half ago. I mean, we hadn't been going to church very often at all. And both Leif and I were on similar pages. We were always just kind of like, yeah, not our favorite thing. Like, we don't really want to go, but whatever. We'll make it work. I don't even remember like a certain moment, but it honestly has been so gradual. But I remember probably a year and a half ago, Leif and I were driving. We're on a long drive, and we just kind of talked about it for like hours. And I remember that being kind of a breakthrough moment where we felt like we really got on the same page. And like, I think there was always frustration on my end of like, I felt like I was, I don't want to say moving faster in my journey, but like, you know, I would uncover things and be like, oh my gosh, this and this. And Leif's like, yeah. And I'm like, no. Like, why aren't you mad? And he's like, well, you know, he would kind of, it's like the classic, I don't know what it's called, but when you are talking to someone and they like agree with you, but then they start like defending the thing that you're talking about, like they'll be like, yeah, that is crazy. But then if you go harder, they're like, well, I feel like da da da, and he would kind of defend the church, and I would be like, why are you defending it and whatever. So anyway, then I remember on this trip, like, we kind of just got on the same page, and he was just like, I completely agree. And it wasn't this moment of like, we're going to leave the church. It was just like, we got on the same page. And from that point forward, I think both of us just felt less guilt. We're like, we just get each other. We understand where we're at, and like, we don't connect with this anymore, and we don't need to be like pretending to connect with it. Yeah. And I remember Leif like started drinking coffee like probably like a year and a half ago, which is so silly that I'm even like bringing that up, but it is a thing. It's like the pipeline. Thing. It's one of the steps.
Totally. Absolutely.
And we started being like more open in front of our families. Like, he would just order coffee in front of my family. And I remember my parents were like, oh, what is that? And he's like, it's a cappuccino. And they're like, okay, cool. And like, then he ordered coffee in front of his family, and we just started being less. And same with garments. I was like, I'm going to not even wear things where it's like, yeah, I'm wearing them. I'm just going to straight up wear a tank top. Yeah. And so it was things like that was probably a year and a half ago. We were really, and even though I had been not wearing my garments online for years, it felt different in person.
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah. I feel like in person, it's more like, it even still feels different to me. Like, when we go to an extended family thing, I'm like, has Uncle Nate seen me in a tank top?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's like a nervousness of like, is this new person going to like say something or like ask me something? And yeah, there's like so many tiny steps of like slowly, publicly. And then if you're anything like me, which it sounds like you are, then you maybe start making like little silly jokes about like, oh, I'm the black sheep, haha, and like try that on for size and like see what happens. Exactly. Yeah. How was it with your families? Like, did you ever have to like sit everyone down and like announce anything, or like what's that been like with family culture for both of you?
we never sat anyone down. I did call my dad probably like a year ago. I don't know when it was. So my dad has always been extremely open-minded and very, I don't know. I've seen him say and do things that he doesn't completely agree with the church on a lot of things, which makes it, honestly, made it a lot easier for me, because even though my entire extended family and pretty much everyone else is, my dad has always been a little bit more, I felt more comfortable talking to him about this stuff, because he had been outwardly like, oh yeah, I don't agree with that part. Which felt groundbreaking to me when he would start saying those things. I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could question, I didn't know you could just
disagree
not agree
with something.
Yeah. So I remember I called him because he would still go to church like all the time, and he wouldn't usually stay for all the hours, but he would go to like, the first hour or the first 2 hours when it was back in the 3-hour days anyway. And I called him and I was like, why are you still Mormon? I'm curious. And he just kind of laughed. He's like, whoa. Like,
that's a great question.
I was like, I'm just curious because I know you disagree with a lot of things, and like, but you still go to church, and like, I don't know. And we had like a long conversation, and I was just like, I'm just finding it harder and harder for me to go to church and pretend like, it just feels like pretending. And it feels like a lot of people I know just pretend. Like, so many people I know wear their garments, quote unquote, around their families. They go to church, but they don't believe in it. And once I started being more open with my like lack of belief, I guess, people would come out of the woodwork and be so honest with me.
Yeah.
And be like, yeah, I don't wear my garments, I don't believe in it, but I would never leave the church because of my family. So anyway, I just had this whole conversation with my dad, and he's just like, yeah, like it doesn't, he just kind of validated what I was saying.
Cool.
He was like, you can do whatever, and you're very smart, you're very intuitive, and all this stuff. So we had that conversation.
That's
and
really
then,
nice.
Yeah.
Sounds like he has a lot of trust in you, like doing what's best for you.
Definitely.
Which is huge to have that when you're leaving Mormonism specifically.
Yes.
So that's like a huge gift to give a child.
It is. And I think both of my parents have always trusted me in that way. Like, just really built me up to be like, you're a very smart girl. And so we just trust what you do. And that felt really nice. And I know people don't always have that experience. And I never sat anyone else down to be like, hey, I'm distancing myself or whatever. I think everyone just kind of knew. Again, it's like having the public platform is a blessing and a curse, because people can kind of just see your life. So they're like, well, we can kind of clue into the fact you obviously don't. We're posting that we're going to brunch on Sundays. We're not going to church, whatever. And I'm like, they see the pipeline. And so sometimes I just feel like it's like a don't ask, don't tell situation with a lot of people in my life. It's like, they love me enough and I love them, and we're just kind of like, yeah, it is what it is.
Totally. It's not necessarily going to be productive to have to like have a big old conversation about it. And like, I'm that way with a lot of family members, and I'm like, I do hope that one day like maybe things can get more open and there can be maybe more of that discussion. But I'm like, for now, with where everybody's at with their faith, it's just like not worth it, and we can still be so close without having to like do all that. But yeah, I mean, to your point with having a public platform, like I kind of feel this way now with my podcast, where I'm like, if anyone wants to know where I'm at, like they can listen to my podcast, which is really nice actually, because I'm like, I don't have to be like, I want to tell you this, but it's like, if you want to opt in to my story, I'm telling it completely unfiltered, and you can like come listen if you want. And that feels really nice. And it's also kind of nice. I'm like, you can't even respond because you just got to listen to me talk for an hour.
True.
But that's nice. I feel like also people who leave gradually, and I was the same, it's not like people are really surprised. So it's kind of like,
shocked. It's not like a one day you just, flip a switch.
Exactly.
They're like, I could have seen this coming.
Exactly. Yeah. How has it felt for you navigating that publicly with your platform? How have you made decisions about talking about it or not talking about it? And like, what do you feel like there's been fallout from you talking about it? Like, what's that been like for you?
So much more support than fallout.
Good.
Which is, I think it says a lot, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I remember specifically probably a year or two ago, someone asked on a Q&A if I wear my garments. And I was like, I'm just going to answer this. Like, I have, which I don't need to, by the way. It's not like I'm like, I owe this to anyone. It just, people ask all the time, and I'm like, I might as well just say whatever on the elephant in the room. Obviously, I'm not wearing them. I'll just tell you why. And I just posted and was basically like, no, I don't. I've never felt super connected with them. I tried for a while and it just didn't like sit right or fit with me or click with me. And I can't remember what else I said. And I got, I think, over 1,000 messages.
Really?
And I was like terrified. I was like, I don't want to check them. And as I was going through them, I did not see one negative one. They were all just like, I don't wear my garments either. Thank you so much for saying this. Like, I don't connect with them either. Da 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 da. And I was shocked by that. There has been some people who, I don't know, don't like, you know, when I make light of it or when I make jokes or when I talk about it. And a very common thing that I know I've seen you talk about too is people be like, oh, now is this your whole personality?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just can't leave it alone that you left the church. Cool. Da da da. And I'm just like, I'm so over. It's the most tired,
so tired,
predictable,
so
take.
boring. Come up with something new.
It's so boring and it's so silly.
Yeah.
Because it's like you said, yeah, leaving your foundational religion that you've devoted your entire life to. If I want to talk about that, I will talk about it every day, actually. Yeah. And in conversations that I have with friends who have left the church or whatever, even if Mormonism comes up every time because it's such a huge part of our lives. It was just everything to us growing up. And so, yeah, I am going to talk about it. And I think I'm at the point now where like when people leave those types of comments, it will get to me sometimes where I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so annoying. But more than anything, I'm just in my unapologetic era where I'm like, hell yeah, I said what I said.
Yeah,
and sorry. If you don't connect with that, unfollow and follow a Mormon influencer who validates your experience.
Totally.
That's what I do. If I see someone who on TikTok talking about something that I'm like, I do not agree with that, I scroll.
Yeah. Move along.
You can even block me if you don't want to see it anymore.
Yeah, totally. It's like, not interested. Move along.
It just doesn't. It's like everyone is entitled to say what they want to say.
Totally.
And that's that.
See, that's so fascinating because as you were saying that, I was thinking like, okay, I get comments like that too. And I'm like brand new on the scene. Like no one knows me. The thing is with you is like people feel like they know you. Mm-hmm. They feel like they've supported you for years. They feel like, oh, I know Jaci. Jaci's an LDS influencer. Like I'm LDS too. So they probably feel like a lot more entitlement and just like a lot more connection to your journey. Because I'm thinking like my sisters are still in the church and they like, you know, like Maddie Murphy, they listen to the Bad Broadcast. Yeah. And I'm always like, oh, now like Maddie is being like so much, she talks about it.
More open about it.
And I'm like, oh, that's interesting because I feel like for them, my sisters, they're probably like, now when they listen to Maddie's podcast, which before it was a space that maybe validated them.
Totally.
It's not anymore. And I'm obviously, like it just is what it is. She shouldn't need to validate. And now people who at first maybe weren't validated by her now are, whatever. But my point is I'm like, oh, like they probably feel like I listened to this person, I connected with this person, and now I don't on a really big thing. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like a lot of pressure to be in a position of like, oh, like this means something to people that I'm literally a member of a certain religion. Mm-hmm. I just really admire people with public platforms like yours being willing to like talk about it and be authentic about it, because it's like it's hard enough when you have 2,000 followers and a private Instagram, you know, but when so many people are like kind of feeling entitled to your life and then the religion piece is added, it's a lot.
It is. And I empathize with that. I actually do. Like I was actually thinking about that on the car ride over here. I was thinking, which again, from the beginning, I've tried not to be that LDS influencer, which I think has served me well because that hasn't been like my whole identity on the internet. But I've thought about that many times, just how, you know, like our Utah show sold out so fast when we did our podcast tour. And I think that a lot of my followers are Mormon. Yeah. And like, that's what I'm saying about the multiple perspectives thing. It's like, I see that. I feel that from them. I see that perspective and like, I love them and I don't want them to be like, oh, like you used to be Mormon and like, you know, you were this like wholesome influencer and now you're not. And yeah, now I'm a hoe. And it's like, you know, I get that. But I think it's just like growing up, getting older, I just can't possibly please everyone. And it's like you said, now my story and what I'm sharing now, it validates a different group of people. Yep. And that's where I'm at. And I always just want to be authentic with where I'm at.
Totally. And like, what are you going to do anyway? Like, that's the thing. It's just like, you've got to just do your thing and like share what you feel compelled to share and called to share. And with religion, there's like these like you know, kind of delicate things you have to deal with. But I feel like ultimately, like, you can't just like never talk about it or like pretend it's not happening, you know? And I mean, maybe some people do and that's how they want to do it and that's fine. But I feel like that willingness to talk about it too. One thing that I think about with what we were just talking about with like people who do still follow you, who are Mormon and stuff, is like, this is just becoming more and more a reality that people are leaving the church. And I think people in the church are also just like inevitably getting used to it in a way where it's like, it's fine. Like, people say stuff and like I can follow someone even and just like not look at that stuff or whatever. And I've been thinking that with like family cultures where I'm like, families are just gonna have to get good at being mixed faith. They just will have to, because if they can't, then families will be like falling apart left and right. Like, too many people are leaving. Like, parents are just gonna have to get used to it and like make it work, you know?
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's, I don't know, maybe it's like a selfish perspective, but I'm like, it's good for you. It's good for
Totally
people to be surrounded by people who believe things that are different to them. And I think growing up in the environment that I grew up in, a lot of people that I know, like my grandparents or other people in my family, they don't interact with anyone who's not Mormon.
Yeah.
I'm not joking when I say that.
Oh, totally.
They don't have a single friend who is not Mormon. Their whole life and identity, specifically like my grandparents, is going to church and being around people who are in the church and talking about it and whatever. And I guess just watching that. And again, I have so much respect for my grandparents in a million different ways and I love them very much, but I have seen that and I do not want that for my life.
Absolutely.
I want to be surrounded by tons of different people who believe different things than me. And I think even moving to California, you know, what's funny is that moving from like my smaller town, whatever, I mean, it's not tiny, but just, you know, living in Gilbert and then moving to LA and like moving to California, people like Mormon people would always be like, oh, be careful and stuff. And even my friends who are Christian will say the same thing. Like when they moved to California, it's like, oh, that's where the lukewarm Christians are. That's where the California, da da da. And I'm like, no, it's where the melting pot of cultures is.
Yeah.
It's where you're surrounded by people who are not exactly like you and it widens your worldview. Therefore, it makes your decisions different.
Yep.
And it is funny because I told Leif, I'm like, well, honestly, most people that I know that have moved like near us, that we were friends with, that we grew up with, like they have left the church as well. But it's not because they moved to California specifically.
It's not the geography of California. Yes. It's because they widened their worldview and their perspective. And if that was the outcome of that, again, maybe that's something to look at and think about. Like, why would we want to insulate ourselves if our truths are challenged by meeting different people? Like, that there's something to consider there, right?
Exactly.
And like, if you can go anywhere and feel like comfortably and confidently Mormon, that's great. And that's awesome. But like for a lot of people, like when you do get exposed to different worldviews and different types of people, and if it causes like questioning, that should be like, that's a gift of being around people who are different than you.
Exactly. Traveling was a massive part of I forgot to mention that. That was honestly like one of the biggest parts of my deconstruction was traveling and seeing people in France and seeing people in Indonesia and seeing people in Australia and realizing that probably none of them were Mormon. Yeah. And that they were living such amazing lives and beautiful lives and just getting exposed to a different way of life. I don't know. It's very eye-opening. And I think when you only stay in Arizona, Utah, and Idaho, and you're only surrounded by people who think very similar to you, and they grow up the same way and they have the same morals and whatever, you're just not being challenged. You're not learning as much as you would if you were surrounded by different people.
Absolutely. And I think the internet is a huge tool for even people who aren't moving but are on the internet. It's like you're going to see and hear different perspectives. And I was talking about this I just had Ash Adams. Do you know her?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to listen.
She's amazing. She was saying, we were talking about this too with TikTok, like TikTok is different than Instagram too, because I feel like it feeds you things that you're not even necessarily like seeking out based on just like, I don't know, their algorithm is insane. But I was like, people are just going to start, like, you don't have to get on the internet anymore and be like, tell me about Joseph Smith. Like, you're going to get on TikTok and something's going to pop up in your face. And within the first 5 seconds, they're going to say like, Joseph Smith, slept with a 14-year-old girl. And like, that's different. The level of information people are getting fed is very different. And same goes just for like life experiences and stuff. Like, you get on TikTok, you're immediately seeing people from like all over the world sharing their experiences, oftentimes very like vulnerably, and talking like in depth about their life. And I feel like that's kind of accelerating that like expanded worldview piece that you're talking about too.
Absolutely. Social media has, in my opinion, just expedited people's journeys to leaving the church tenfold. I mean, you could just get on and you see more information than you used to be able to.
Totally.
It's like I was saying, I just feel like these institutions can get away with a lot less than they used to be able to because of the internet.
Exactly. And that feels like, I would never say it's like part of my mission to like, you said this too with like history and truth claims. That's like not my jam on Girlscamp. I'm like, I want to just talk about like stories and experiences, like more of the cultural stuff like interests me more. But I do feel like with truth claims and history, it's just like we live in a different day and age. Like, it's not hard to figure out like what happened.
Totally.
Like, we don't have to go to the library anymore.
Right.
Because like, God knows no one's like gonna go check out a book on Utah pioneer history, but now you can just like Google it, and that's like changing things a lot. I feel like we're seeing like the impacts of that. I'm curious where you feel like you're at now, like spiritually in relation to religion, just like the impacts of leaving, and like, yeah, maybe more about like once you left until now, like what that's felt like for you with deconstruction and rebuilding and stuff.
I still feel like I'm in kind of an in-between stage where I will feel so confident. And so I'm not at the stage anymore where I question my own decision making, where I'm like, wait, am I doing the right thing? I don't question that anymore. Like, I know I'm making the right choice for me. But I think it's like I'm saying, when I get those comments of like, whatever, that are just pushing against me, I'm like triggered by them. I'm like, oh my gosh, it still bothers me sometimes. So I'm kind of in an in-between stage there. But it's kind of like we were talking about earlier. When you go from being very certain about everything in life, what's going to happen to you after this life, everything, to being like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I believe. It's really scary, but it's also the most freeing experience I've ever had. And I was just saying this on a recent YouTube video. I would hear when people would say like, I left the church and I've never been happier. Like, I've never felt more myself. I've never felt more free. And I always just like didn't believe them. When I was a believing Mormon, I was like, oh, that's the, literally the devil, like making you feel good for now. And now that I've experienced it, I'm like, oh, I get it. I understand what you were saying. I understand what you mean by feeling free. I feel freedom from not knowing things.
Totally.
Instead of fear, honestly, I feel freedom in not trying to figure everything out, into not having to do all these steps to like secure my position in the afterlife. I'm just like, I'm just going to live life. And I think that everyone is just trying their best with the information they have. And they're also we're all trying to do the same thing. I literally think all of us in this world are trying to live a good life and hopefully go to heaven with our families forever. Like, isn't that what we kind of all just hope for? Yeah. And I think there's so much different verbiage, and people are just so scared of the different words. Like, if people say, I've seen this thing on TikTok. I don't know if you saw this girl. Actually, I think you might have stitched it, but she was like, I didn't manifest this. I prayed for this. And it's like, I did
stitch that.
Number one, it's like you're getting so caught up in the verbiage. Like, it's the same thing. Like, you did the same thing. And I think people that are super religious, like, it's very fear-based a lot of times, the verbiage thing. It's like, oh, we can't say the word manifest. We can't say like this because that's spirit. That's not God. That's not about Jesus and stuff. And it's like, I always tell Leif, if something good happens to me, I can attribute that to whatever I want, right? So if I'm having kind of a hard day and then I find an amazing parking spot and things start going right for me. That's a silly example, but I could be like, oh my gosh, God knew I was having a hard day and he gave me this little blessing. Or I could be like, I literally manifested that. Like, I was just saying I wanted to have a better day and then this happened. Or I could give myself credit and be like, oh, it's because I was here at the perfect time. We can just attribute whatever we want to whatever we want. And I think that's what we all do.
Totally.
That's what we're comfortable with.
Yes. And we're just trying to find the framework that fits best, that makes us feel most empowered. I'm really appreciative of you saying that because, yeah, people who are like, I prayed for this and I got it. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, truly, I think prayer is so beautiful and can be so powerful. For me right now, I don't like that. Like, that framework doesn't fit where I'm at right now. So I like thinking of things more in like the manifestation kind of zone. There's also tons of people who believe in manifestation and prayer and I think that's such a compassionate way of looking at how people are living their lives, is just like people are trying different things on for size. And the more like the problem with the Mormon church is it comes with a lot of problematic, harmful things too. But the more we can like try and help these institutions like shed those things and just be like, hey, we're all just trying to connect to life and to each other and to ourselves. And that's going to look different for everybody. And I feel like at that level, I do have respect for everyone, wherever they land.
Definitely.
And it does get complicated when it's like, well, okay, but there's harmful policies or whatever.
And I feel that deeply, by the way. I'm not saying like, we should just like respect everything. It's like, I also have moments of just complete annoyance and anger where I'm like, this is so freaking dumb. Like, why, certain whatever beliefs.
Totally.
But my dad always says like, no one is trying to mess their own life up. And I think that that's just really important to remember. Like, yes, people can self-sabotage or do things maybe subconsciously or unknowingly, but I really believe that no one is out there being like, I want to live a horrible, sinful life. I just want to be crazy. I want to do bad things. It's like, we're all just trying to like be good people and do what, you know what I'm saying?
Totally. Absolutely. And it's hard. Life is hard.
It
like,
is.
And that does, and I don't think it sounded like you were saying that at all. Once an institution like says they own a certain way of doing that, that's when things get like a little complicated in my opinion. But I feel like that doesn't take away from the fact that at the core, I think that's what most people are trying to do, is just connect. And especially with Mormons, that's why it's so hard to leave Mormonism, is because people have had their core foundational connections with God, the universe, themselves, their families, so entrenched in the Mormon theology and that verbiage you're talking about. So then when you feel like you're feeling uncomfortable with all this other stuff, you're like, but wait, I felt this connection. And it's so validating and freeing to know, oh, I can still have that good stuff without the dissonance, without all the other stuff that comes with it.
Absolutely. I think one of the main takeaways for me has been like, I always viewed when I was in the church, someone leaving the church or someone being like, I drink coffee now, or I drink alcohol now, or whatever. I always looked at that as like, oh, you are just going on this like dark path. You are going off the deep end, like they say. And I always looked at it so black and white, which I think is the irony also of some people going in the complete different direction is because I believe because they've been taught such black and white thinking.
Absolutely.
It's hard for them to live in the gray area. But I think something that's been so awesome and comforting for me to realize is that, just like you said, I can keep the parts of Mormonism, of the morals I had growing up or whatever that I liked, and I can kind of toss the other stuff, and I can live in this gray area where live a pretty wholesome life. Like you know what I'm saying? And not that even has to be your journey, but it's like, I still live a very much, I think, life based upon respect and love and all of these things. And I can still not believe in the Mormon church. And
absolutely.
I can dress like a hoe, and I can still love everyone and love myself and
drink some coffee.
It's like, who cares? Like, it just, these little things I'm just not caught up in anymore. And it feels so good.
Yes. Mormonism really does breed like a certain type of people. And I feel like Mormons are, because we got married young, we were able to start our careers earlier in a way. A lot of us have like a different sort of financial maybe like leg up in some ways. For example, when my husband and I got married, we then qualified for Pell Grants, so our school was paid for, so we didn't have to have student loans, and we went to BYU, which was super cheap. Like, there's a lot of these advantages. And then when we leave Mormonism, we're almost like really hyper productive people who had all this like Mormon kind of like pressure cooker and were just like ready to go, but like not in Mormonism anymore. And it's really interesting to watch happen.
It's so true. That's actually such an interesting, that's like very fascinating to me.
And like what you were saying with that like wholesomeness, it's like, yeah, I'm 28 and I'm like married. Like I wouldn't be in this situation without Mormonism. And this situation can be like a huge, I'm grateful for it.
Right. It could be a blessing. It's like a good thing in a lot of ways. Totally.
Yes. And I feel like influencers, like people I've followed for a long time, and like watching how that's kind of like affected careers, but like positioned people. And not that like Mormonism is to credit for being like in a position of success, but it's like a piece of what got certain people to where they're at, and then they leave. And it's just like kind of interesting to like watch that all unfold.
It's a piece of the puzzle for sure.
Yeah.
And you know what I've also been uncovering lately is I feel like one of my main personality traits has always just been like you said, very career driven, very success driven, work, whatever. And like I mentioned, that didn't really fit into the Mormon mold for like a girl to be that way. And so I did feel weird about that. But I also was thinking, I wonder if that's why I've made it my whole personality trait, is because to prove like, okay, well, if I'm going to be this way, I need to make a lot of money. I want to be successful so that people, this is, as I'm saying, like when I'm a little bit younger, thinking subconsciously, I want people to basically, not, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess just prove myself. I want people to see and be like, oh, she actually is successful. She, you know, and not be like a failure. And I'm like, I wonder if that propels like my literal workaholism, is being like, I'm going to show you that I'm a girl, but I can be the breadwinner.
Yes.
You know?
I'm going to be different. I mean, it sounds like I feel very similar to you. Like I love pushing against the grain. And so like that creates a lot of motivation, quite frankly.
It does.
To be like, I'm going to be different, and like I'm determined to be different. And it comes with like, it can be a good thing and a bad thing, because I have to sometimes step back and be like, whoa, like I don't have to prove I'm happy outside of Mormonism. I can also be unhappy. That's going to happen too.
Exactly.
And like there is a burden of proof of like, I'm so happy, I'm so successful, like my marriage is perfect, because you know that Mormons look at you and think like, oh, when you leave the church, your marriage fails and you're unhappy, whatever.
Well, and they use everything as evidence.
Yes.
Like but it's like I was saying earlier, you can use whatever you want as evidence for either way. So when people leave the church, if something bad happens to them, it's like, well, look what happened. It's like, what about all the bad things that happened to me when I was in Mormonism?
Exactly.
What about the fact that I was asking my mom, I'm like, do you think that grandma thinks that I can't get pregnant because I like don't wear my garments? And we were just talking about that. I was kind of joking, but I'm like, I'm not joking also.
Yeah.
But it's like, what about all the 3 years of infertility when I was in the church?
Yep.
Does that not count for anything? You know what I mean? It's like you can use whatever you want as evidence of, oh, you left the church, this bad thing happened, that's because you left. Well, you were in the church, this bad thing happened, but it's part of your journey. It's part of your story. And
exactly. Yep. And same goes on the outside. If you're saying you're happy, people are going to comment and say, why do you have to prove you're happy? If you're happy, you wouldn't talk about it. But if you're unhappy, oh, it's because you left the church.
Exactly. Yeah. Scream.
You have to get really good. And I'm sure you're like, practice this at like such a level that, again, I admire so much. Like, you just got to do what you got to do. And I see that in you. And I really admire you. I've like admired you for so long. And I feel like you are kind of like a beacon for people. Like even starting this podcast, like I'm a What We Said girly from
Valley Girl
from
life.
Day one, Valley Girl over here. And like I relate to so much of, I don't know, even the things that I feel like you and Chelsea talk about like people making fun of your voice or saying like, and these things that I feel like women, those things stop us from just like doing the things we want to do. Like
Definitely.
It was such a hurdle for me to start a podcast because I was like, I say like, and some people say I have a vocal fry. And I was like, oh, like
welcome
that,
to the club, baby.
Seriously. And I'm like, fuck that. Like, who cares? And I feel like women like you who are just like doing the damn thing and willing to do it publicly and to like share about it and share vulnerably about it. And now that you have left the church and are talking about that, like that's so huge for people. It really is. And like, I know I appreciate it so much. And I'm sure like that is affecting and empowering like so many more people than you even realize.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for saying all that. That means so much to me. And sometimes I feel like on the internet, it's so easy to take the negativity or just, you know, the pushback and be like, oh no. And hearing that, especially in person, it's like kind of just this feeling of like, oh, maybe I am on the right track, like doing, you know what I mean? Like maybe it does empower people, and that's really nice to hear that. And I also feel like what you're doing with this podcast is so important. Like I really believe that. I think that people can call it whatever they want. Like, is your whole personality trait? I think this is like so insanely necessary for specifically girls our age, to just have a safe place, because a lot of times when you grow up in Mormonism, or if your whole family's Mormon, some people I know will message me. They're like, I have no friends who are like also in the same position. So I feel like I have no one. And I feel like I'm lucky to have some friends who are, you know, I've kind of gone through this process together with, that I can vent to and whatever. But I feel like you are that person for them.
Thanks.
I think that's so important. And I also feel like you are so articulate and smart, which I freaking love, because it's just so, not that other girls aren't, because they are, but it's like you specifically, I just feel like this is so aligned.
Thanks. I really, really appreciate that. I think my biggest hurdle in doing this was that thing of, I'm like, yes, I'm post-Mormon, but like there's so many other things about me, obviously. And sometimes that's like my fight against it, is like, this is what I'm choosing to have a podcast about, and like choosing to like create a thing around. But I do think it's necessary, and I really, really appreciate that, because I feel like creating a space where people feel like they can like come and just like share their story is like really important to me. And a podcast is such a good format to do that, because it's like long form, we can get into it all. And I feel like, yeah, that just means a lot to me. It's hard work. Podcasting is crazy. You've been doing it for so long.
I know.
I like
5 years.
I admire it. I'm always like, it's hard work, but it's so fun. It's like the best. I feel like I was trying to find my thing for so long, and I'm like, oh, podcasting is like it. It's so fun.
It is.
It's so nice, because unlike TikTok, I'm like, I'm going to make a point here, and if you listen for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to like dissect every single angle of that point I made and make all the disclaimers, where on TikTok, it's like you just have to say the thing.
Totally.
And it's good practice to do that too, but I feel like podcasting is nice to talk about this topic specifically, because it requires a lot of nuanced thinking, a lot of complexity, and it's nice to feel like there's a format where we can like really dig into it in this way. So
it's the best. Podcasting is the move. And I feel like for you, even though this is your thing that you're talking about, is being post-Mormon, I feel like there's so much room for growth after, if you don't want to talk about only that. Like, if you have a consistent podcast and you're posting on TikTok for a long time, people will just fall in love with who you are. And then because I already feel that way, where it's like, now if you started posting like, here's my workout, I'd be like, I'm literally gonna watch. Like, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, just because you're you. And so I think it's like this is kind of your talking about the stuff, is you're in to all of this, and you can at any point change it up, or you could do it forever. It doesn't matter. But I'm just saying, like, I think that your podcast can evolve at any time. If you're like, I don't want to, like, I want to tell you more personal things about my life too.
Totally.
It's like, great. You can do that too.
Totally. I appreciate that. I feel like you're a good example of that too, of like being on social media as long as you've had to pivot so many times in so many different ways. And it's cool also to see, like, in a world that still, even outside of Mormonism, wants to put women in a box, wants to say like, well, are you a fitness influencer or are you a fashion influencer? Like, being more than that and like showing up as all parts of yourself, I think is a really important thing to do on the internet. And it's hard to do when everyone's like, niche down, niche down, niche down.
No. Do you know what I think? I think as women, we have to demand respect. And that's something that I've been trying to do on the internet, is if like someone makes a comment, I don't normally reply to even like negative comments, honestly. But if people do say like, I thought you were this, I thought you were a photographer, like, and I'm not saying demand respect in a mean way, but like, take your power into your own hands and be like, I'm whatever I want to be. And that's what I say all the time on YouTube. I'll like give a life update about infertility or religion, and I will say, and next month I might change my mind. Yeah. And that is perfectly okay. And I will let you know when I do. Yep. You will not put me in a box. I will not put me in a box. Yeah. And like, you have to demand that respect from other people. It's like, I will share what I want, and it's not disrespectful. That's the thing, is that I think there's, specifically with women, when you're like sharing your truth or whatever, people will take it as disrespectful.
Totally.
And it's not.
It's not. It's your truth.
It's your truth, and you need to demand the respect of like sharing what you want to share.
Amen. I love that so much, and that's exactly what you do and exactly what you give other people permission to do. And the more women that are doing that, the more women then feel like they can keep doing that.
And the better our world will be.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Did you have a better girls' camp experience?
Oh, it was so much better. I want to come back. I want to come back next year.
We're going to do an event, and I'm like, I want to do all the fun girls' camp stuff, but none of the boring church
None of the
stuff.
toxic.
Yeah, none of the
modesty.
toxic stuff.
Oh my gosh. I'd love to come.
Thank you so much. Seriously, I'm so glad this worked out. You have been dream guest day one. I'm so honored, so flattered you're here. Thank you, for real.
Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much for having. I love the girls campers.
Yes,
or whatever they call them.
campers. Goodbye, campers. We love you.
Love ya.
Demand that respect you deserve.
That's
girls.
right, baby.
Amen.
G-I